Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do the first of a series of videos that I have been wanting to do for a while, but with the typical constant stream of new products to review, I tend to have to focus on those things. I've got a little bit of a lull right now in that there have not been a lot of new lenses or cameras released recently, and what I do have I can't share with you yet because it's before the release date and announcement date of those products. So I've got a little window here, and so this is the first of a series of videos that hopefully helps to answer the questions that I most often get from the audience, and that tends to do with gear recommendation at different budget levels. And so I'm going to talk about today I'm going to be talking about APS-C and which system to go with, or reasons to go with each of the options that are out there, along with some of the lens options that I would recommend going into that. I'll follow that up with kind of a budget full frame and then a medium and upper tier approach to full frame when it comes to mirrorless cameras as well. So stay tuned for those. Today, however, we're going to take a look at APS-C platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist, modern wallet that sets you free from a bulky traditional wallet while also making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. Visit phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber. You can even customize your wallet with new accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even the Chipolo tracking integration if you're the kind of person who loses their wallet. Use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out. And so the first question that I often get from people is if they're coming in with no gear investment to start with. So we're going to assume that because obviously if you've got a significant investment in one platform, you have to have a really compelling reason to switch to another platform, for the simple reason that you're almost always going to take a financial hit when you sell off gear from one system to invest in another. And so if you for example, already have a lot of Sony gear or a lot of Canon gear, very likely you're going to want to find the best available option within that type, and so you get to continue to use your gear. But we're going to assume today that you're starting fresh, and so you are invested in no camera system. You want to go APS-C, and so here are some of the the recommendations over what I have seen over time in that. So basically there are three main players when it comes to the APS-C space, and those would include Sony, would include Fuji, which has really focused on APS-C, doesn't even do full frame and skips over right that to medium format. And then of course Canon with its M series, it stepped into APS-C mirrorless space a number of years ago, and it remains a significant player there. And so out of these three options, here is kind of the reasons to consider or to reject each particular brand. When it comes to Sony, which I'm currently using Sony for APS-C because the strengths of Sony are those that fit me best, but that may not be true for you. So reasons to consider Sony is that Sony has, by a pretty wide margin, the most significant amount of lens options available. Sony has been much more open source than either Fuji or Canon has been, and a byproduct of that is that you end up with a lot of third-party development. And it's all kinds of lenses. Some really significant and good, a little bit more premium options are available there. There is a wide range of third-party primes that are available, and of course there is all kinds of cheaper manual focus type lenses that, where you can kind of flesh out your system on a really tight budget. And I've reviewed a lot of those, budget lenses over time, and there are some fairly good ones out there, and there's other ones that are not so good, and so you really need to take that on a case-by-case basis. The other thing that I think that Sony does really, really well is when it comes to autofocus, particularly autofocus during video capture, where they are some of the very best with their IAF face tracking technology, and once you hit about the A6400 and later, they have one of the best autofocus systems out there. Reasons to consider Fuji is that Fuji has in many ways some of the most advanced camera bodies, and particularly if you look at their kind of higher end, they go kind of a tier higher with APS-C than what anyone else does. And so if you're looking at the XT series like the XT3 or the XT4, you are getting into more sophisticated bodies. A lot of manual controls, more features, faster burst rates there, particularly higher end video specs up to 4K 60. And when you're talking about the XT4, you're also putting in a very quality in-body image stabilization system, a little bit higher grade of build in those cameras. There's kind of a retro aesthetic that a lot of people like, though I will note that the XT3 or XT4 bodies can be a little intimidating if you're not accustomed to doing a lot of manual control. Another great option there is the XS10, which has image stabilization, a few fewer manual controls, but comes in at a more comparable price point to something like the A6400 or the Canon options that we'll talk about in just a second. And so the other thing that Fuji has is they have a little bit wider range of lenses in terms of premium options. They have some very high-end lenses available there, which not everyone has. In fact, almost no one else has for APS-C. And they do have a good range of other options at lower price points. Though I will note that until very recently, Fuji has been pretty much a closed platform, and so almost no third-party development. That is changing, but at this point at least, I've seen some change in that maybe the most recent Samyang, the 12mm f2, has been released for Fuji. Tamron's most recent Zoom has been released, the 18-300mm VC, and then Sigma is releasing a trio of its f1.4 primes there. And so those are all very good options, but there are certainly more options available for Sony. The other disadvantage that Fuji has relative to either Canon or Sony is that you don't have the option of adapting in the same way. And what I mean by that is that you can draw from both the APS-C and full frame catalog of lenses on Canon or Sony, whereas you don't have that option on Fuji. And so that is another potential constraint of maybe multi-using lenses to where you're using them on multiple cameras and getting some value. For example, I very often use some of the compact Samyang prime lenses that are actually full frame primes, but I use them on APS-C because they work really well there as well. You don't necessarily have that option on Fuji. The other reason that people really like Fuji bodies is they like Fuji's JPEG engine, and if you like to shoot JPEGs, you don't want to mess with post-processing, there is a little bit more options for film emulation on Fuji, and a lot of people just really like the way that their engine in camera produces JPEGs. So a few reasons to consider Fuji. Canon is a little bit complicated in that Canon's, I think, chief advantage at this point is they do have the highest resolution sensor. If that's a priority for you, you do have a sensor that has 32 megapixels of resolution, which is higher than the highest Fuji option, which is currently at 26 megapixels, or the highest Sony option, which is around 24 megapixels. And so all of that, of course, is subject to change, maybe shortly after I release this video. But at the moment, highest resolution is there. Also, Canon's dual pixel AF tends to be very good, but you're also not getting as fully featured of camera bodies. For example, the M50 Mark II doesn't even have a built-in viewfinder. That's an add-on accessory. And so it's a different kind of approach, and maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. Also, while Canon does have some third-party development for it, like some of the Sigma primes that I mentioned previously, what it doesn't have is a lot of the newer zoom options that are really, really good options, like those from either Sigma or Tamron, and they're unfortunately not available on the Canon EF M mount. And so Canon's strengths are, the ability to adapt, high resolution, good autofocus, but unfortunately, there isn't a huge range of premium options in terms of lenses on the Canon space. So the sum total of those things, what you prefer, it's going to vary. And so kind of take some of the little breadcrumbs that I've given you there that may help you to follow to the right destination for yourself. So a secondary topic is to talk about whether you want to go invest in a zoom lens or zoom lenses versus prime lenses. Now, there are a lot of great options out there, and again, particularly on Sony, has the broadest range of options if you consider both the first party and the third party options. So when it comes to those options, I would say if you're looking on the Sony platform, you have three kind of basic choices, a fourth including a Sony option. And so a Sony option that I do really like is their 18 to 135 millimeter lens, which I reviewed. I think it's a really well executed lens that does a lot of things reasonably well. And so it's certainly worthy of consideration, and it has a moderate price point that is worthy of considering. Now in third party space, there is the Tamron 17 to 70 millimeter f2.8, which is more of a premium zoom, and its advantage is it does have image stabilization. They're VC, and so if you're choosing a camera like the A6400, it's a way to get stabilization in a way that you're not going to really get on any of the prime lenses, and so it is a reason to consider a zoom there. And if you want to travel light, Sigma has a very interesting new 18 to 50 millimeter f2.8. It's extremely compact, really high performing optically, and certainly is a well worthy of consideration. Then if you want the super zoom option, available on both Sony and Fuji, is an 18 to 300 millimeter from Tamron. It does have image stabilization. It's surprisingly good optically, and I would say very close to the Sony 18 to 135 millimeter in performance, and I would say very similar in performance to options on Fuji, like the 18 or 17 to 50 millimeter, and I think it's 18 to 55 millimeter maybe. And then they also have an 18 to 80 millimeter or 17 to 80 millimeter zoom as well. And I would say that the Tamron is not really far behind either one of those optically, and obviously gives you a much bigger zoom range. Its downside is it's pretty large for an APS-C lens, and so it may not be for everyone. But certainly those are some really valid options to have. On the Canon front, I actually am fairly partial to their own 18 to 150 millimeter zoom. If you're going to buy a kind of a do-everything zoom, I think it's one of the better ones out there. And when I was setting up a camera for my daughter, that's the one that I went with there. I got her a Canon body with the 18 to 150, and it handles most of her needs. And so those are some quality zoom options there. So why should you consider prime lenses instead? It's kind of the same argument regardless of the platform. You're trading some flexibility of the zoom range for some versatility when it comes to the aperture. And so you can get lenses with an aperture of f1.4 or f1.8 versus the largest you're going to get is probably around f2.8 for a zoom lens. And so there are some really good options out there for prime lenses. And if you're on the Fuji platform, definitely check out the new Sigma lineup of f1.4 lenses, 16 millimeter, I believe it's 32 millimeter, and then 56 millimeter, all of which I have reviewed previously, and they're really solid options. On Fuji, I like kind of as a sweet spot some of the f2 lenses, like the 35 millimeter f2, which I think are really sound optically. They have weather sealing, and they're fairly high performing there. Some good native Sony lenses, there's fewer options in terms of APS-C options that have been released on Sony as far as primes, and so there are a few out there that are fairly good, but none that kind of just stands up as a must recommend. Now, one thing that Sony does have that I certainly would recommend checking out is they have a 70 to 350 millimeter telephoto zoom, which is really a really good lens. It's a little more pricey, but if you're looking for a strong telephoto option there, it's well worth considering. Now, Fuji also has some of the more pro-grade f2.8 zoom options that are worthy of consideration there, and I'm quite partial. Probably out of all those, my favorite is the 17 to 55 millimeter f2.8 that is really good optically. But again, it is fairly pricey. So there are some good options on all of those platforms. You really needed to choose what your priority is. Some people are more prime lenses in terms of their shooting style, and they would rather focus on one focal length and shoot it really well, shoot it creatively. Other people want the versatility of a zoom. There's no wrong answer to that question. It really comes down to what what suits your own shooting style. And I think at the end of the day, even though you're listening to me right now, I think your opinion is probably the one that matters the most. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I just want to give you a little more information in doing it. And so as far as the camera bodies at the moment that are worthy of consideration from each brand, on Sony, either the a6400 or the a6600, they have the best autofocus systems that you can have at the moment on those. The a6600 is the more premium model, though some argue it doesn't have enough features to differentiate itself, to justify its price relative to the a6400. Your mileage may vary. You can check out my comparison video on that where I break all of that down. On the Fuji front, for me, the XS10 really hits a sweet spot in terms of price to performance, and I think it's a really strong camera option. You may also prefer to go to a little bit more, bulky and higher end body of the XS or the XT3 or the XT4. I prefer of those two the XT4 largely because it has in-body image stabilization, which I think is a really important feature to have these days. And on the Canon front, the M50 Mark II is probably the best option at the moment, though it's time for some new Canon APS-C mirrorless bodies to come out. And so here's hoping that there's a better option somewhere near on the horizon. And so at the end of the day, there's a lot of choices out there, and I just hope that this video has helped to give you some of my experience, what I've encountered as being, things that are worthy of consideration when it comes to investing your hard-earned money in the APS-C platform. Stay tuned for the next episode where we'll talk about full frame if you have a tighter budget and the direction that I would recommend that you go there. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to some of those playlists that have the various individual reviews of the things that I've talked about, and so you can check that out and find more information there. There's also linkage there to check out Craig and I's new channel, Let the Light In TV. There's also links to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, purchase channel merchandise, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.